Former President Trump says he averted nuclear war with North Korea when he was in office. Hello, this is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button. Today, we're going to be talking about former President Donald Trump. In recent weeks, he's been making comments about how nuclear war was averted with North Korea. And I think this is a very kind of important historical thing to talk about, kind of an not lesser known part of the Trump presidency. Everyone remembers his meetings and kind of breakthrough with North Korea via diplomacy. But not as much has been discussed about how close to the brink we might have actually gotten with North Korea. But Trump is starting to talk about it a little bit. And I caught this headline over at foxnews.com. It states pretty much there, Trump says the U.S. avoided nuclear holocaust with when he made deal with North Korea. Former President Trump made the comments in an hours-long deposition in the New York civil fraud case. He claims he, quote, averted nuclear holocausts, quote, via his diplomacy. He says, I was very busy. I considered this the most important job in the world, saving millions of lives. I think you would have nuclear holocaust if I didn't deal with North Korea, Trump told lawyers in the New York Attorney General's office in April. He added, I think you would have a nuclear war if I weren't elected. I think you might have a nuclear war now if you want to know the truth. So this is an issue. Trump ran on this in 2016. He often accused his opponent, Hillary Clinton, of being a warmonger. And there was lots of issues coming up, including Ukraine and Syria at the time, and kind of what to do about them. And with Trump, he was often coming from a context of avoiding war and intervention, as it was. And he also was describing this in his interview with Tucker Carlson. I wanted to give you an opportunity to hear from Trump himself how he sees the situation with North Korea as it took place at that time.
And I got to know the leaders of all of the countries, essentially, but the big ones. And the bigger, the tougher the leader. You know, it's like sort of, I guess maybe that's the way it's supposed to be. But I got to know President Xi of China and Putin and Kim Jong Un. North Korea did a great job with North Korea, kept us out of a nuclear war. We would have 40,000 dead soldiers right now. They'd drop a nuke right on top of the military base. But we have 40,000 soldiers over there. And I did great. I got along with them great. That's a positive. You know, the press said, he said nice things about Kim Jong Un. I also said horrible things at the beginning. Horrible enough that he wanted to talk. And we talked, and we met in Singapore. We met actually twice. And we had unbelievable meetings. I know him very well. We were in great shape with him.
What do you think he and Xi and Putin think of Biden?
I think they can't believe it. I think they probably say this is some kind of a system. You know, they had great respect for our country. They respected me. They had great respect for our country when I was there. Every one of them. Look, if you go to North Korea, you take a look at what happened. You know, the Olympics was dead. South Korea spent billions on the Olympics. Nobody was going to go. They didn't want to get blown up. They called me and they said, we are going to let the Olympics proceed. This is North Korea. I said, you should go into the Olympics. Put your athletes in. It wasn't like, you know, they were big on athletes because, you know.
Famine.
But they went in and they actually participated. And within about 2 days, the entire thing was sold out. And if it wasn't me, that would have never happened. But I got along very well with him, and that's a positive thing. He does have massive nuclear power, by the way. And if Hillary would have gotten in, or if the Obama thought process continued, it would have been a nuclear war, absolutely, with North Korea. He was expecting to go into a war, and it would have been a nuclear war.
So there he is talking about the potential for nuclear war, and he was convinced, he says, at the time. And I suppose this is in 2019 when they have this big kind of diplomatic breakthrough. And I wanted to give you an opportunity to see this as well. This is Trump meeting with Kim Jong Un at the demilitarized zone. And
I've never expected to meet you at this place.
All right, so they're chatting. North Korea leader invited Trump to take a step forward. They're walking into the demilitarized zone.
You will be the first U.S. president to cross the border.
He steps in. This is a typical kind of foreign meeting, but very unconventional for the American president to be walking together into North Korean territory and shaking hands. And this is our screenshot for the video. And so if there's a moment where we're averting war, this is one of those moments. And I think is important. And it's just historical kind of context for what Trump's talking about here. There was a diplomatic breakthrough. There was this kind of, are we about to go to war? Because North Korea was launching missiles over Japan and through that entire region, and South Korea in a very threatening manner at the same time as they are believed to have developed nuclear weapons. And then so you go from that threat and the possibility of war to the ability to then have a handshake and to talk with one another. And I thought it would actually juxtapose very well with another American president, Ronald Reagan, who did a bit military buildup in his first 2 years in office. But at the same time, he was actually a nuclear abolitionist. And he actually got to eventually sign the first ever strategic arms reduction treaty in world history. This was in fact, the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. And this was in 1987. And I wanted to give you an opportunity. We always play him at the Brandenburg Gate saying, "Tear down this wall." And so this comes much later. So after the build up, and then after being able to, get the diplomatic breakthrough, you're meeting at Reykjavik. Eventually you get to the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, which banned an entire class of nuclear weapons. And this speech kind of goes on a bit. So I'm going to have to play with mostly because of the translator, because I guess Gorbachev didn't speak English too well. So, and I guess Reagan they wanted to be able to have both sides hear the speeches simultaneously. And so this is a little unconventional, but probably typical for, venues like the United Nations or just the State Department. You just have two foreign leaders. You're going to have the translators right there. So I'm going to fast forward through the Russian translation. But here is Ronald Reagan, the other nuclear abolitionist.
Welcome to the White House. This ceremony and the treaty we're signing today are both excellent examples of the rewards of patience.
Благодарю вас всех. Добро пожаловать, который мы терпение.
I first proposed what were 6 years ago.
Примером награды за терпение.
It was over 6 years ago, November 18th, 1981, that I first proposed what would come to be called the zero option. It was a simple proposal, one might say disarmingly simple.
Более 6 лет тому назад я впервые это было просто.
Unlike treaties in the past, it didn't simply codify the status quo or a new arms buildup. It didn't simply talk of controlling an arms race. For the first time in history, the language of arms control was replaced by arms reduction. In this case, the complete elimination of an entire class of U.S. and Soviet nuclear missiles.
В отличие в нем впервые было заменено по ликвидации целого количества американских и советских ядерных ракет.
Of course, this required a dramatic shift in thinking, and it took conventional wisdom some time to catch up. Reaction, to say the least, was mixed. To some, the zero option was impossibly visionary and unrealistic. To others, merely a propaganda ploy. But with patience, determination, and commitment, we've made this impossible vision a reality.
Это трудности, некоторых реальным, но с терпением недоступны в реальность.
General Secretary Gorbachev, I'm sure you're familiar with Ivan Krylov's famous tale about the swan, the crawfish, and the pike. It seems that once upon a time, these three were trying to move a wagon load together. They hitched and harnessed themselves to the wagon. It wasn't very heavy, but no matter how hard they worked, the wagon just wouldn't move. You see, the swan was flying upward, the crawfish kept crawling backward, and the pike kept making for the water. The end result was they got nowhere, and the wagon is still there to this day.
Господин батя, они впрягли их усилия, что лебедь тянул. В результате
Well, strong and fundamental moral differences continue to exist between our nations, but today, on this vital issue, at least, we have seen what can be accomplished when we pull together.
нужно сказать, однако мы видим, все тянем
The value of this,
направление.
the numbers alone demonstrate the value of this agreement. On the Soviet side, over 1,500 deployed warheads will be removed, and all ground-launched intermediate-range missiles, including the SS-20s, will be destroyed.
У Совета снято сразу, включая
Our entire
20, будут уничтожены.
On our side, our entire complement of Pershing II and ground-launched cruise missiles, with some 400 deployed warheads, will all be destroyed. Additional backup missiles on both sides will also be destroyed.
С нашей стороны все уничтожены, будут уничтожены.
We have the important
У обеих сторон также будут уничтожены.
But the importance of this treaty transcends numbers. We have listened to the wisdom of in an old Russian maxim, and I'm sure you're familiar with it. Mr. General Secretary, though my pronunciation may give you difficulty, the maxim is dovyai no provyai, trust but verify.
Но значение
На
этого...
каждой встрече вы это повторяете.
You repeat that at every meeting.
I like it.
Мне нравится. Но значение этого договора выходит за рамки чисто...
So there you go. That's how peace is made. There's Reagan, there's Gorbachev, and there's actually another part of this speech and then the signing that I also wanted to show. So this is actually good, the end of Gorbachev's remarks.
Датой, которая обозначит водораздел, отделяющий эру нарастания ядерной угрозы от эры демилитаризации жизни человечества.
May December 8, 1987 become a date that will be inscribed in the history books, a date that will mark the watershed separating the era of a mounting risk of nuclear war from the era of a demilitarization of human life.
All right, now they're shaking hands, and they're going to go sign the treaty now. And this is right before his final year in office. This is 1987, December. So it took him his whole presidency to get this done. And at first, he didn't have anyone to talk to until Gorbachev came along. They did a lot of senior kind of caretaker leadership at the beginning of the Reagan administration, and so Reagan's doing the buildup. He's modernizing nuclear forces in Europe. He puts a lot of missiles into Europe that he ends up banning in this treaty. So they're signing the treaty here, and that was the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, which is no longer. In fact, it was ended by President Trump when he was in office for a variety of reasons. I get that's what John Bolton, he was the national security advisor, was pushing for. He called them sacred scrolls, but you still have opportunities for, even without the treaty, opportunities for diplomacy. And so that's what I think that you didn't need the treaty to try to, the INF Treaty, I think, would have probably banned many of the missiles that Kim Jong Un was shooting around. So one of the reasons why I think that the treaty became antiquated, such as it was, even if it was an important one to the denuclearization of the European continent, it would certainly ban what Kim Jong Un was shooting around. But they weren't a party to that treaty. China, not a party to that treaty. Iran, not a party to the INF Treaty. So I suppose you could make a case for perhaps expanding it to include other actors, but it will clearly take diplomacy. It'll clearly, because if the alternatives are, oh, there's either going to be a nuclear war or we're going to talk. It's like, well, Trump says, well, why don't we talk? Why don't we talk this over? And this is a similar point to, I think, what he's making about Ukraine. He was making it in 2016. He was warning of a nuclear war with Russia back then as well. And I think it's kind of on his mind. And so here, I wanted to give you an opportunity to also hear Trump talking about Ukraine in the Tucker interview. I find this very interesting.
Plus, the beach doesn't represent what a president's supposed to be doing. You're supposed to be working. You're supposed to be getting us out of that horrible, horrible war that we're very much involved in with Russia and Ukraine. You could do that. You could do that very easily. I believe you could do that I don't believe he could do it because he's just incompetent. But that's a war that should end immediately, not because of one side or the other, because hundreds of thousands of people are being killed. Can you imagine you're in an apartment house and rockets are going into that building and blowing it up and knocking it down? And why should anybody, human beings, these are human, whether they're Russian or Ukrainian or whatever they are, it's got to be stopped. And it can't be stopped very easily. It would have never started. If I were president, it would have never started.
So,
and so then Tucker wants to go and ask about Biden and just the context there for, Trump's juxtaposing his leadership. And so he includes this portion about, how do you deal with Ukraine vis-a-vis war with Russia? How do you avoid war? And I think it looks something like this. I think it has to include some aspect of being able to talk to the other side, which is ultimately what it takes. Even if you're challenging them up front, ultimately, I think what you want is, you want peace more than you want, particularly nuclear war. But it seems to be on Trump's mind. He's talking about it, and he's been talking about it. I think his entire even if he wasn't using the verbiage so much, it kind of more low key, I think, once he was in the White House. And so this is something he does on the campaign trail, even as he was taking steps to, I think, avoid what could have been a catastrophic outcome. He speaks of the military base being bombed, but it's also Seoul. It's also probably obviously areas in North Korea. If they're going nuclear, then we're probably going to launch back at them. You'd have the millions of people dead, and that when you can't make these deals. And so I think he wants to talk about it because he felt like, people don't understand why you would want to talk to Kim Jong Un. Like, why talk to Kim Jong Un? He's throwing all these missiles around. And the reason is because you can avoid war. Over what could be, starts out as something of a misunderstanding that can dramatically escalate. In the early 1980s, there was almost an accidental nuclear war between the U.S. and the USSR. This is before Gorbachev gets in there, but the Soviet early warning system had basically failed, but it had shown that the U.S. had launched a single nuclear warhead at Russia. And the man who was manning that post, who was looking at the early warning system, said it must be a bug. If they were going to launch, they'd be launching everything at us. They wouldn't just launch one. It's probably a bug in the system. And they didn't report it up the chain of command. He just unilaterally decided he was not going to alert the Kremlin that there had been a nuclear weapon launch because they would believe the early warning system. He thought that the early warning system, there must have been something wrong. Turns out we hadn't launched a nuclear weapon. The man at the post, he was correct, and that in judging that there was a bug in the system. But what if he had reported it up the chain of command? It would have been a misunderstanding, what you call an accidental nuclear war. It almost happened in the early 1980s, because if they had believed that we were launching at them, they would have launched at us. Reagan would have launched back. That'd be the whole show there, and you never get to hear. Even if the treaty wasn't going to last, it shows that it will always take further outreach between whoever your leaders are. Now, maybe the leaders we have today are nothing compared to the leaders we've had in the past. but they better be, because there's just as many of these weapons around nowadays. And so you can try to scare the other side into not using them by just this idea of mutually assured destruction. But Reagan, I think he came at it from a different approach. When he and Gorbachev were at Reykjavik, they couldn't ultimately agree, but for a few moments there was a deal on the table to abolish all of the nuclear weapons. Drew back and forth, and then it's like, well, why don't we get rid of the intermediates? Like, okay, sure. Okay, what if we get rid of all of them? And then both sides agreed. And then they came to, but Reagan said, we need Star Wars. We need to have missile defense in case anybody else develops them. We'll develop it with you. But that was a bridge too far for the Soviets at the time, and the Russians. They couldn't go that far. They didn't want to get rid of what was called the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. That was from the Nixon administration. Richard Nixon, he got the first strategic arms limitation treaty where they slowed down nuclear weapons building. This is in the early 1970s. So that's SALT I under Nixon. You get the ABM treaty that basically forbid missile defense. But Reagan wanted to do that. He said, why don't we, if we're going to get rid of all the nuclear weapons, why don't we, still allow for missile defense? So let's, I guess he was proposing to lift the ABM treaty. Now, Bush ultimately got rid of the ABM treaty, just as Trump ultimately concluded the INF Treaty. But the point being that it takes decades of nuclear diplomacy, and then you have the situation that we see today. Vis-a-vis Russia and invading Ukraine, Putin speaking about nuclear war. The NATO has expanded recently to include new countries in Northern Europe. That Russia had previously said, don't put Finland in, just like Ukraine wanted to accede to NATO as well. And Putin says that'll mean war. And so there's this danger. Once again, in Eastern Europe, and no surprise, Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons after the Soviet Union fell, as a part of a mutual kind of defense agreement with the United States and Russia. This was during the Clinton administration. And so we promised them that we would protect them if they got rid of their nuclear weapons. So I guess we're somewhat making good on that promise by shipping all these weapons and training and personnel over to Ukraine, such as it is. Even if we're not getting involved, officially in theater, as Trump said, we're very much involved over there. And so there's this ever-present danger. So you have to ask the question, where are the peacemakers? Can Joe Biden, does he have the ability to communicate with Moscow? We better hope so. He's the president. You only get one president at a time. Could Trump communicate and prevent a worse outcome? He seems to think so. He says, "Oh, you can get this over in 2 days or 2 weeks or whatever." He's exaggerating. He always exaggerates, but he wants to emphasize, I believe, what his aspirations are, and using it and doing it with the sales pitch. Reagan would tell kind of stories all the time, and jokes and use humor to illustrate his points. And he was able to disarm leaders, foreign leaders, with his humor and good wit and charm, and being able to talk to our adversaries overseas. Is that because he's a Manchurian candidate or some type of Russian agent? Not at all. No more so than Ronald Reagan or Dwight Eisenhower was, or John Kennedy or Richard Nixon, for that matter. Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, they all had these treaties. Kennedy stopped the Cuban Missile Crisis by agreeing to pull missiles out of Turkey, as Russia was pulling their missiles out of Cuba. So that you could say that was a strategic arms limitation as well. I mean, it wasn't an official treaty, but they got it done, and it averted nuclear war. Nixon, he gets the Limitations Treaty, gets the ABM Treaty. Ford and Carter get SALT II done. Reagan gets the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty started. He starts the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty talks, but they weren't concluded. So George Herbert Walker Bush, he gets START done, and that gets signed in as the Soviet Union's falling apart. And it's like, oh, we've got all these agreements. If we don't need, if we're going to not go to nuclear war, maybe we don't need this communism thing anymore. And so the Soviet Union was falling apart as well. all at the same time. And then you fast forward, another 15, 20 years, you got Obama and Putin. They do START too. So they expanded on what Reagan and Bush and Gorbachev had agreed to in the 1980s and early 1990s with the START too. And that was with Putin. I mean, if Obama can talk to Putin, I don't know why it was such a horrible thing that Trump would try to capitalize on those successes and move forward in this regard. But there he is. Trump, it's very much on Trump's mind. He's thinking about preventing war. And that, is there anything more important for a president in the nuclear age to do? And, we've talked about this in the past. And I think every president since Harry Truman has spoken of the prospect of nuclear war always in the negative, that it was something that must never happen. And it was Ronald Reagan who famously said that nuclear war cannot be won and must therefore never be fought. And so you always pray for the wisdom of your leaders, and you hope they can be as smart as he was. And we'll see with Joe Biden. I mean, what's the saying from Monty Python? We're not dead yet. So I guess something might be going right there. But that's the commentary. This is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications, and have a good day. I'll check out the chat. I don't expect this to be a real barn burner of a live stream. We're not talking about trials, and we're talking about issues here. Let's see. Jody Price, Trump 2024, FJB. What's that mean? Let's see here. Wayne Clark. I've seen all this. Yeah, but people need to see it again. We always hear Reagan at Brandenburg Gate. We don't get to hear him. We don't get to hear Reagan. He was challenging Gorbachev, but he was also, I think, trying to engage, and it ultimately proved to be successful. Betsy Burns. Democrats criticize Trump for things like this, but I haven't seen any one of them do anything to stop wars or engage peace. Same thing happened with Reagan. Same let's see here. And then one way or another, Trump will be president. That's Betsy Burns again. Thank you, Betsy. Michael Lazuski, good evening. Woke up today still feeling like I'm in that movie Groundhog Day. Biden's still president and the fake news still fake. One day he will be gone and it won't be fake news. Well, I mean, they have term limits, but it might be 8 years. Never know. Here's Maria De Leon Kolka. I guess you're praying there. Yeah, we should be. Michael Luziski. I remember when all that happened. Scary times. I guess either maybe that's when I was talking about the accidental almost nuclear war or the Cuban Missile Crisis. But glad you're watching out there, Michael. Hope everything's okay. Helene Weber. Oh, Field, same way. Okay. Helene Weber, Illinois in the house. Thank you for watching in Illinois. Let's see. Michael Luziski. They were making us do drills in school by hiding under our desk. That wasn't going to do anything, Michael. I don't think that would be any protection. But maybe it made the children feel like there could be some protection. I'm not sure why they did that. But maybe it had something to do with child psychology, thinking about the end of the world. In a way that was like, oh no, you'll be safe. You can just hide under your desk. But obviously that's not true. Helene Weber, good idea. World instead. Let's see here. Michael Lazuski has sort of news today. They predicted over 7.5 million illegals have fled to our country, invaded our great nation. It only took a few 100,000 Russians to invade Ukraine. Biden, by lifting the stay in Mexico, has created the worst invasion that Americans ever saw in our history. Sort of. I mean, it's not like a military force invading. It's more like hundreds of thousands or millions of refugees coming into the country over a period of several years. And then ultimately, maybe they marry an American citizen, then they become citizens themselves, something like that. And then via current federal law under chain migration or familial migration, then your relatives can come in, and then I think I'm doing research on this, and so I have to go back and look at the numbers. But a significant percentage of chain migration is just from Mexico alone. and it owes to, in part, the amnesty that Reagan did in the 1980s. That once somebody becomes part of the franchise, the family migration, chain migration, that applies. But let's see here. Terry Holden watching from Vermont. We need Trump. So yeah, there's some Trump supporters here. Again, he's talking about World War III. He's talking about nuclear holocaust and how to avoid it. And so, you hear similar sentiments, I think, again, from every president, Republican, Democrat, since Harry Truman, about the nuclear war. It's something you need to be avoided. And even Joe Biden makes those statements. And we've highlighted those, I think, in the past. But maybe we should go back to that and see, like, where is Joe Biden on this nuclear war issue? How do you avoid it if if it looks like we might go to war in Ukraine, which would mean going to war with Russia? How do you avoid that? You expect the president, an American president, to probably be talking about that, but in very kind of clear language that the other side understands. I mean, lest you get a misunderstanding, lest you get an accidental or worse, an intentional one. But that's the commentary. This is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy, again, with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications, and have a good day.